The National Hurricane Center says that this tropical wave has a 60% chance of development over the course of the next week. Where does it go, and what could it mean for us here in the Carolinas? That and more this week on the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina, along with Frank Strait in Columbia and Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and welcome to a live edition of the Carolina Weather Group for this July the 31st, 2024. The end of the month is here, whether you like it or not. This week, we are talking the likelihood of a tropical development, a 60% chance that a cluster of thunderstorms could develop into something near Florida, Bahamas, Greater Antilles by the time we get to the weekend. 60% chance of development, or as Frank likes to call it, a 40% chance of not development. Right, Frank?
That's right. 40% chance of this thing not developing at all, at least not in the next week.
That's right.
I think there's a slightly greater, but maybe not much greater than zero chance of it waiting a week to develop and then developing. But
Frank will take us through some of the scenarios. Scotty's got some analysis on where this thing could go, but we're going to show you right off the top here one model run, and then my colleagues can tell you whether or not they agree or disagree with the model run. But I want to just kind of paint a broad general picture, if that's okay with everybody, of where this thing could go according to one computer model run. So you can see that we might get something kind of organized in this particular model run at 9 o'clock on this Wednesday. It's on the west coast of Florida. Ask again in an hour, and it could be on the east coast of Florida. So the jury is still out, like we always have with all sorts of different model runs, but we got to start with the now so we can figure out the later. Frank, what are you looking at here?
Well, that is a satellite view, infrared satellite view of the tropical wave that we're concerned about, and that the Hurricane Center has a 40% chance of not developing. And I would say it's centered somewhere around Puerto Rico, but it doesn't really have a center. It's just disorganized. Earlier today, it looked like maybe somewhere over the far northeastern Caribbean, there was a little bit of curvature trying to form. I can't really say that at this point. But one thing we have now that we did not have 24 hours ago was good widespread thunderstorm coverage associated with this tropical wave. So it is moving into a somewhat more favorable environment, at least in into an area that's has more moisture and is more conducive to thunderstorms forming. However, there's a good bit of upper level westerly wind that's causing wind shear. So even if there were a center, it'd still be struggling. So that's what we have right now. The question is, what are we going to have going forward? And I think the bottom line is that we really just don't know that right now. Right, Scotty?
Yeah, and that's been a big question. Thankfully, down here at the coast, we've been talking about this, I guess, since the weekend, since this first really kind of appeared. But a lot of people are not overly concerned just because I think a lot of the broadcast meteorologists, a lot of National Weather Service, you guys at DNR really just kind of honing in on the fact that there's so many questions and not nearly enough answers to kind of figure out what's going on. We do know that this system, as I made this graphic earlier, it's showing 3 tracks. Earlier today, track 1 and 2 there off into the Atlantic was one to be considered. And then over the last, I guess, 12 hours to 24 hours, a favorable track, maybe even into the Gulf of Mexico is now possible. In fact, the latest National Hurricane Center outlook kind of has all the way from Myrtle Beach all the way into the Gulf of Mexico favored in that orange area of development. So like Frank said, we don't even have a system yet. And until the hurricane hunters are able to go in and kind of fly into the system and really get some real decent data to start working with, we just don't have a clear-cut idea of exactly what's going to happen. So the best case scenario, as we've always say in these situations here, is just keep checking back. Make sure you're following those reputable sources. I know there was a lot of social media chatter early this week about, oh my gosh, here's the next big thing, but it's not it's not there yet, and it may never be there. It does look like whatever forms could be fairly on the weak side of things, especially as what it's looking like right now, model wise. But it's always important to remember this is hurricane season. Tomorrow is August 1st, and we really know from August to October the season really starts to really get in the prime time. So it is a good reminder after, what was it, 30 some day break from Beryl and
Yeah.
Chris, that the tropics have been really quiet. So this is a good reminder of, hey, we're still in that season. We need to continue watching it. But as of right now, there's just no clear cut answers of what this system will be, even if it is a system.
And Lincoln, you missed Chris, but go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, you mentioned sending the hurricane hunters in, but there's no point in even doing that until we have a coherent center for them. Without that, there's no point in sending the hurricane hunters because there's nothing for them to hunt.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Maybe in the next 24 48 hours, there'll be something more for them to go in and investigate with. I do like, Scotty, and I wanted to go back to it here, this graphic that you made, which shows that we are still in that 6 to 7 day out window with this thing kind of unorganized down towards the Lesser Antilles. So if something were to organize, it wouldn't be able to reach Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina for another 6 to 7-ish days. I think that's a really good tone set.
It is. And it's really one that, the weekend is where we really, I'm not saying we're not paying attention now, but the weekend is kind of like when things are really starting to evolve and kind of figure out what is going to happen as it gets closer to the Caribbean Sea and the Bahamas. And there's a pocket of dust out there that is dry, dealing with some drier air at one point earlier this week. So, once we get into a little bit more favorable environment, which the Hurricane Center all along has been talking about, this isn't in a favorable environment right now, but is expected to move into a more conducive environment. It's just really one to wait and watch and see. And like I said, it's just a great opportunity to, as the Weather Service in Wilmington said, in numerous discussions over this week, to dust off the hurricane plan and just know what you might need just in case something was to happen.
Yeah. I'm going to look right into camera and tell my family who's vacationing on the east coast of Florida, who I think is tuning in right now, trying to get their heads wrapped around this storm logistically too. Like Scotty said, it's a tad early, and I know everyone wants answers as soon as possible, but I think even by daybreak tomorrow, we'll have a little bit better vindication, at least for maybe the Bahamas and Florida. And then as we get into the end of this work week, those watching from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and I suppose we shouldn't leave out the Gulf Coast either, because it could go that way. We'll have a better expectation of what later weekend into the start of next week could look like, because again, there's more than one scenario on the table. But just to zoom this back out, if this computer model were to become reality, and it may not, it is ending its loop right here on Sunday, really early Sunday morning. So plans right now in Florida on Saturday would seem to be okay, but all of that, of course, is subject to change, because like Frank and Scotty have been saying, it's hard to track the forward momentum of a thing that hasn't really even formed yet.
And James, if you could go back to that the last frame of that model, a couple of things also to notice. You notice there's a cold front draped across the Carolinas, so that's going to help decide where the system goes. There's if we expand it out over close to Bermuda, there's high pressure over there as well, also kind of dictating the lane that this hurricane, or this tropical, didn't mean to say hurricane, but the tropical system could be guided across. So there's a lot of elements, even in the atmosphere at play. Where does that front stall? Does it stall further back over the Midwest? Does it high pressure extend a little bit closer to the Carolinas and guide it? Look, there's so many answers and just no legit. There's so many questions, but no real legit answers right now until this thing really sits a circulation.
Use my mouse cursor if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook with us. Even if this thing doesn't come to the Carolinas directly, it's always fascinating to see the role that the Carolinas play, right? So that front that Scotty's talking about in that last frame, you can kind of see it as a line of storms wrapped across the Carolinas that will help steer this. Frank, before the show, we were talking briefly about different model runs. So this is the NAM, but there's of course the GFS. There'll be the HER when we get closer to the European. So let me take this down for a second and let me just ask you, is there something else model-wise that would be good to share?
In this situation, relying on just one model or one of the deterministic models, we call them, is probably not the best way to wrap your head around what might happen. And instead, let's use what we call ensembles. Now, what an ensemble is, you know what the GFS is for the most part. It's a model that's run, resolution's fairly high, it covers the whole world, and it shows you the best single guess we can come up with. Well, an ensemble, instead of just using one model runs, it uses the model run a bunch of different times. In the case of the American models, called the Global Ensemble Forecast System, GEFS, there's a total of 31. There's one where it's run sort of like a deterministic model and everything's left the same. But then the other 30 times you run it, you make slight changes to the input. And when you do that, you can look at all of those solutions together and get an idea of how sensitive things are to those initial conditions being changed and give you a better idea of how things may go. In other words, if each model run showing something similar to the others, and there's not much difference or spread in the models there in that ensemble, then you can have more confidence in your forecast. If there's a lot of spread and they're showing widely diverging solutions the further out you go in time, you have less confidence. Well, if you want to call up my screen share there, James, I have the GEFS in front of us here, showing where the low pressure tracks are. And you can see some lows going across the Great Lakes there. That's a mid-latitude storm that isn't much of a concern for us, except for how it might steer the tropical disturbance near Puerto Rico now. But over Florida, east of Florida, west of Florida, and this is the GEFS, by the way, this is showing the tracks of low pressure centers there. And you can see they're all over the place. Some of them track from east to west. Some of them track from west to east. Some of them south to north. This is kind of a bowl of spaghetti. And in this particular case, this particular ensemble has 31 members. So it doesn't look like maybe half of them are actually showing a development at all. So that's one ensemble's solution. Now I'll go and switch over to the European solution.
Much more clustered.
Ensemble. Right, a little more clustered there. Now this goes through Wednesday morning. And this is from this morning's 12Z. And again, this is the European model, and then the European model initial input being changed 50 different ways. The Euros ensemble has 51 members instead of 30, a control run, and then 50 where the initial conditions are perturbed a little bit.
And can I just briefly define that for anyone who's not familiar? It would be like saying, okay, and I'm making this up, but right now the sea surface temperature is 71. Well, what happens if we make it 72? Okay, what does that do to the scenario? What happens if we make it 73?
Right.
What does that do to the scenario?
Right, and there's the other changes you can make too, like the temperature in Colombia. We know it at the initial time when you're putting the data into the model that it was 70, but suppose you make that 70.7, or suppose you make the wind speed 9 miles an hour instead of 7, or make the wind direction coming from 230 instead of 270. Make slight changes, and those how well you see things clustered as you go out in time, despite that little tweak that you make, and it also helps to account for uncertainty in the measurements, because not every measurement has a little bit of uncertainty in it.
Right.
So this allows you to have an idea of how much confidence you can have in the forecast. Now, yesterday, all these low pressure centers were clustered over here on the Euro, and that's one of the reasons why we were so concerned about a track near the East Coast, because that's what the Euro has, and the Euro's ensemble is usually the best one. But it isn't always the best one. It looks like in this particular case, maybe it wasn't, because it's starting to look more like the GEFS. So just because the euro is quote unquote king euro, you hear it being buzzed about on social media because it's the best model doesn't mean it's always the correct model.
They just proved themselves really well during Sandy.
Yeah, exactly. And the euro, even though it is a better model, we're talking about it getting the forecast right 92% of the time instead of 91.2% of the time for the GFS. So
I mean, what I liked about
difference.
What I liked about your explanation of why ensemble models are better than single models is that it's like asking a room full of people for their opinion versus one person, and also taking into consideration each person's bias.
Correct. Right. It's almost like almost crowdsourcing a forecast.
Yeah.
And
in some ways.
Also, to put it in school terms, it's like your whole school semester instead of just one test.
Right. Right.
Sure.
I mean, that's
sort of like an average.
Each track is a grade, and instead of just focusing on that.
And you can have all kinds of fun with this. You can say, well, okay, if the model, the ensemble has sort of like a bell curve of outputs for high temperature in Charlotte next Tuesday, and you can take the mean of that and think that is your most likely value, and then looking at the bell curve, you can go out, one standard deviation and say, well, the most likely range is +2 or -2 degrees from whatever the high temperature forecast from the ensemble mean is. So you can get run some interesting statistics and see what the best forecast might really be, and also knowing what the magnitude of that standard deviation is gives you an idea how much confidence you can have in that forecast.
And just remember, for anybody who's watching, just remember this is how we forecast our winter storms around here too. And never take the deterministic. You always look at the ensembles, because that gives you a much better picture, a much better idea. It kind of gives you the 30,000 foot view instead of the 5,000 foot view.
Right. That's especially true in the long range when we're looking at things that are going to happen a week from now. A single model run, it's valuable. The deterministic run is valuable because it is your highest resolution, best single guess you could come up with. But what you get out of an ensemble, particularly the mean for that ensemble, is probably going to be the best thing and better than the deterministic model.
Yeah. I was just going to say, for anybody who's at home just shaking their fist at their screen going, just tell me what's going to happen, feel free to put your questions, comments, wherever you were watching with us. We'll try to answer them to the best of our ability, and we'll have better answers as we go through the weekend. So
besides, we've already been honest. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's
6
the most
or 7 days from now. You just don't know. We can give you the best estimate. We can tell you what the possibilities are. If is there a 10% chance of a hurricane hitting North Carolina? Yeah, about a 10% chance. That's reasonable worst case scenario. But there's a 90% chance that won't happen.
Just remember, we are no hype here. No hype. We're just going to give it to you straight.
Yeah, well, I mean, the chance of a hurricane hitting North Carolina next week is higher than it would have been last Wednesday when we were talking about the coming Wednesday, because at least there's something on the board. Is it likely? No.
Right.
There's something on the board.
If you would have asked me 6 days ago if there's going to be a hurricane hitting North Carolina, I would say like a 0.1% chance of that happening.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, which was those model runs and data. So I just wanted to over-explain that when we're tracking the tropics, you get radar data if it's close enough to land. You might get some land-based data, sensors, thermometers, and the like if they're close enough to land. There are some buoys out there if it happens to go over them, but the ocean's huge. Otherwise, right now, we are relying on satellites, which are a great piece of technology, but we will get a lot more data when the hurricane hunters literally fly an aircraft into this thing, which I would expect to happen probably in the next few days, especially with Florida kind of in this probability of a U.S. impact. And then that will allow them to get all sorts of measurements, because not only will they have measurements from different parts of this system, but they could actually target where they want data from and what type of data they want. And then they take all of that and put it back into these computer models. So as Frank was talking about these ensembles and things, having more information is always better when it comes to forecasting.
Right. Those observations go into the computer models and make the computer models better, not just for what the hurricane's forecasting, where we're forecasting the hurricane to go, but also the global forecast as well. It all gets a little bit better. And
when everything matters.
Yeah. And when you send the hurricane hunters into the hurricane itself, I mean, not only are they taking measurements at their flight level and dropping dropsondes to figure out what's happening below them and using radar observations, oftentimes they're also sending a hurricane hunter to go fly out in the upper level ridge off to the east to get measurements out there.
So
and
you can better understand where that front might
over
be
the western Gulf of Mexico. They'll fly around out there too to get measurements in that area to get a good idea of what the state of the atmosphere is and feed all that data into the models, and it makes the models better.
All right.
And,
well,
it sounds like that's expensive to do, and it is.
it is.
But on the other hand, the amount of benefit you get from that is tremendous, and you save in the long run.
Are you saying that funding NOAA operations is worthwhile to the American taxpayer?
Of course it is.
I agree. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, throw them on into our chat. We'll try to answer them as best as we can on this Wednesday night. And I will selfishly say that it is worth you subscribing wherever you're watching or listening, because if the Carolinas were to get into a forecast where we're going to have some direct impacts from this, we'll start putting down some special episodes and updates beyond our normal Wednesday slot. So if you're not already subscribed, I will selfishly say it's a good time to get subscribed, because we are heading into that peak of hurricane season. And one of you said it, I think it was Frank. Once that dust gets out of here, I mean, we're back to game on with the peak of a hurricane season around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the waters are super warm right now, too.
They're just waiting for something to come and soak up all that energy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of energy available in what we call the main development region, which is the area between 10 degrees north and 20 degrees north over the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean.
Hasn't been worked over. It's just potential energy sitting there.
Right, except for Beryl. Yeah.
Beryl, well, yeah, I guess I was thinking more of the Atlantic, East Coast seaboard.
Yeah, although interestingly, it's not, the crazy warm that it was back in May. It's not as far above average as it was in May, and also there've been some pockets of cool waters developing too, like the western Gulf of Mexico right now is a little below average. Maybe that's just the wake of the 3 storms that have been through that area, but it's a little below average now. And also, there's an Atlantic version of El Nino, right?
Yeah.
Well, now it's gone into its cold phase, and we have cool waters along the equator in the eastern Atlantic, which has a slight negative impact on the tropical cyclone season, the hurricane season.
I was just thinking, right, because we're in a kind of a neutral phase right now for much of the phase, and we're watching for the development of, and I'm trying to make sure I don't get these backwards on this late Wednesday night, we're watching for the development of La Nina, right?
That's right, which hasn't really happened yet.
No, they it still seems likely, right? But the experts at the Climate Prediction Center at NOAA kind of just move the chances a little bit later into like August, October, 70% chance that I'm looking at here, which is not to say that it's running uber late, but it's, kind of in that window, I think, shifting a little bit further into the later
and
part
the La
of the
Nina not being quite as strong as we thought it might be during the peak of the hurricane season. I mean, right now it's still pretty much in neutral conditions, or at least as of early July, when we had our last set of numbers. We'll have new numbers coming out sometime next week, updating for the month of July. But yeah, last we had an update, it was still in neutral conditions out there, and so it's no surprise that we are actually seeing that wind shear out there having an impact on that tropical wave now, because that's the kind of thing that you tend to see during El Nino seasons. And you can see the wind shear by the higher clouds. It's kind of harder to see in the infrared satellite picture, but you can see these wispy clouds getting blown away to the east by upper level westerly winds. That's vertical wind shear, because you have westerly winds aloft and easterly winds aloft in the near the surface in the tropical regions. That's the trade winds.
We'll get a good real status check on what a lot of the experts are thinking. NOAA is due out with a hurricane outlook update next Thursday, August 8th at 10 a.m. So we've had shows right here in our feed about what NOAA has been thinking, what NC State's been thinking, what experts at Colorado State University have been thinking about the number of potential storms we could see this year. And so NOAA will kind of do a reality check on what their forecast is, whether it's staying the same, trending up, trending down, next Thursday. So we'll keep an eye out for that and see again how El Nino, La Nina plays into that, and I guess the sand and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been hot around here in the Carolinas. We're going to take a 30-second break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the return of excessive heat and the lightning bolt and the thunder that had me jump off the couch last night. We'll be back in 45 seconds.
Have you ever seen what an indoor environmental assessment looks like in a commercial building or business? During a full assessment, we collect data throughout the building and compare the measurements room to room. We can also collect samples that go to a lab, such as the small cassette shown here, which will be analyzed for types and amounts of mold in the air. We follow up with a physical inspection, looking for moisture sources and using moisture meters to determine if any of your building materials are wet.
Go-esg.com or 336-373-1538. Welcome back to the Carolina Weather Group. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this not or yet but I'm going to say it anyway. And if I'm not supposed to say it yet, then we'll just keep it amongst us friends and our groupies who are watching. But save the date for Saturday, October 5th, when you can come see myself and Frank, and I think Griffin's going to be there from the climate office. We're going to be in Greer, South Carolina, starting at 10 a.m. I'm going to just stop there because I don't know what more I'm allowed to say yet other than save the date for Saturday, October 5th, when you can come hang out with your favorite weather weenies in Greer, South Carolina.
At the airport.
At the airport.
GSP Airport, yes.
That's right.
I don't know the exact spot it's going to happen, but that's the plan. Upstate Weather Fest in October. Yeah, Melissa's planning on being there. You're planning on being there, James. I will be there unless there's a hurricane coming. And have to
I
work
might be there
instead.
if there's a hurricane coming. I'll just be fleeing.
There you go.
I think I'll be at Charlotte Motor Speedway, so there will definitely be a hurricane coming.
Oh, Scotty's coming to Charlotte? I'm definitely fleeing to Greer.
No, there's a race that weekend. Yeah, that weekend. Go ahead and mark it now.
I believe so. I'll have to look at my calendar, but I believe that's the Roval.
Oh, is it?
At bare minimum, a 40-knot tropical storm.
I can see that Charlotte has a marathon on that Sunday, so there'll be lots happening.
Oh, there's a marathon and a race. That just ups the ante even more.
And a Panther
flip
race
flop.
too, I believe.
Let's do the NASCAR race on the streets of Charlotte, and let's do the marathon at the track.
That would be interesting.
That'll be fun,
right?
The Grand Prix style.
Yeah.
Get to it.
So it's been real hot out, and it's going to only get hotter. If you like the hot weather from the first half of July, we're going to start the August month the same way. We already have some heat advisories that I know have gone out for at least part of the Carolinas on this Wednesday, and we could see even more of these. If you're watching online with us, you can see the visualization here. Eastern North Carolina, coastal South Carolina, you have a heat advisory, and then is that an excessive heat warning down towards Charleston? Is that what
I believe it is?
Wowzers.
Yep.
Okay, so it's going to get hot. And a reminder that they adjusted the threshold. A lot of the Weather Service offices, or at least a couple of them, adjusted the threshold to... Wait, hang on. Frank, was it make it more prominent or less prominent?
You had to put me on the spot with that. Like I remember them doing it, and I vaguely remember, but I don't remember the exact numbers. But yeah,
that's not fair. I
think that for the Charleston, it's for
110 and above.
Yeah, 108 for X number of hours to get a heat advisory, and then 113 heat index for like 2 hours to get an excessive heat warning, I think. We should have Melissa here. She would know.
I know. Melissa's kicking herself right now. She's like, I told them. Okay, so let me move us over.
Hey, there it is.
There it is. So first of all, heat criteria, advisory versus warning. Advisory does mean that something's happening. We do this all the time, right? With like severe weather and with winter weather in particular. There's no such thing as a heat watch, so that's not really on the board. But advisory does mean a small amount of something is happening, and a warning means a greater amount of something is happening. In this case, even the small amount of something is still a lot, because for a lot of the Carolinas, a heat advisory, this is true right now for Eastern North Carolina, as we head through the rest of the work week, you're looking at heat indices of at least 105 degrees. So that is the air temperature plus the humidity. And that has to be, as Frank said, for more than 2 hours. If any part of North Carolina or upstate South Carolina or the Myrtle Beach area of South Carolina reaches 108 or greater, that would then Nope, I'm saying it wrong. I'm still saying it wrong. This is a lot of numbers for 9 o'clock at
And,
night.
and furthermore,
wish it
Stormy
was
the Weather
general.
Cat has decided to pay a visit,
Yeah.
and she's keying out. But here she is.
Can I try it again?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Can I try again? Okay. So light pink on the map. That's all of North Carolina. That's upstate South Carolina, the greater Myrtle Beach area of South Carolina.
The PD region.
The PD region. So for 2 hours or more,
Most of it.
that would be a heat advisory at 105 degrees. If you are like Frank and you live in the greater Columbia area, the Augusta area, Charleston area, that would be a heat criteria at 108. So it actually has to be hotter in those areas before.
Right.
get
That's
a
because
heat
we're Satan's back porch.
That's right. You guys are more routine to this. And then a warning, that's where it's like really, really bad, right? For most of the Carolinas, it's 110. If you are in Satan's back porch, as Frank put it, in a lot of that central South Carolina and southern coastal Charleston, Hilton Head, down towards Savannah, it's got to be 113 or greater. So the point of this exercise is not only did they change the numbers and they're really confusing and even the smart guys like us have to look them up. Charleston already has, right, a heat warning. They're already in the top tier of the top tiers for how hot it is going to be. And I think it's interesting, whether I can remember the numbers or not, to these heat products that the Weather Service put out are climate based for the people, for the geography, for the topography, right? They're all based on what are the norms in that area. So we can break the little regions down inside the Carolinas, or we can compare the Carolinas to Arizona or someplace else. But like the point is, it's not just one blanket statement for the whole country. If us or your favorite TV meteorologist is saying, hey, we have a heat advisory, we have a heat warning, that is particularly tailored to your community.
Correct.
And
The
don't
Weather
be
Service has
shocked.
studied the climatology of heat index for that area to decide what the criteria should be.
And don't be shocked. Tomorrow morning, this may be upgraded to a heat warning for portions of the PD. Looking at some of the heat indices coming in late this afternoon, they were up around 110 to 112 in the Florence area. So if that continues overnight, that might be upgraded into a excessive heat warning tomorrow for the PD. Here around the Grand Strand, you'll reach that, but it won't be for the duration of time, just because you have the sea breeze that starts to kick in and kind of lowers the temperature a little bit. But
That's the advantage of living very close to the coast, is you get the sea breeze kicked in, and that marine air coming in off the Atlantic is it's still pretty humid, but it's not as hot.
yeah,
And that's when your storms would kick up, right?
Right.
Typically
yeah.
speaking.
Well, today, perfect example of that. I think Florence got to 91, 92 degrees. About 3 o'clock today in Myrtle Beach, it was 84, and it was hot and humid. It was humid, but the temperature was 84 compared to the 91 back in Florence. So,
Yeah.
that
And
sea
yes,
breeze,
James, it does trigger thunderstorms. The leading edge of the sea breeze, often called a sea breeze front or sea breeze boundary, it behaves just like a cold front a lot of times, and will kick off thunderstorms.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much of this you guys got out of my own ignorance, but being on the edge of this heat dome, we've been getting these like waves or like decaying fronts coming through, right? And much like you guys have with the sea breeze each afternoon, I was out last night with my family, 7:30, 8 o'clock, going for a walk, and I was like, it's looking really dark off to the west, and sure enough, old handy radar scope, we had a line of severe storms on Tuesday marching through out of the foothills into the greater Charlotte area. As Scotty mentioned before our show started, we did actually get confirmed damage in portions of the foothills. Claremont had one of those classic gas station awnings get blown over in the severe winds. We had a couple down trees. One landed on a car not too far from where I live here in South Charlotte. Luckily, there were no injuries with that. But I talked about it just as we were heading into break. A bolt from the blue on the back end of the storm. If you look at this radar picture from about 10:30 last night, the cluster of rain had already moved through. And I was sitting watching TV, and there was just a really bright flash of light, and of course, a loud thunderclap that came with it. So we sometimes talk about how lightning can happen far away from the actual main precipitation. You can get lightning when it's not raining, might even be sunny. A lot of times I feel like I see them on the front end of an advancing storm. I don't know if that little cluster of rain near me just was trying to overachieve or something on the back end, but it was like a reminder that even though the storms were gone, that lightning threat was still there. It was 10:30 at night. Most people were inside, but hey, had this been 4:30 in the afternoon, that could have caught people off guard if they had been more out time recreational hours. So that was a good reminder.
Well, you're fortunate, James, in that it was waking you up at 10:30 p.m. when you weren't really sleeping yet. It was waking me up at 2:30 a.m. here in Columbia.
By the time it got down to you.
Yeah.
We didn't get anything here, so it all fizzled out.
Yeah, we got almost another inch of rain last night, which got us actually close to a top 10 wettest July, despite the fact that there was hardly any rain until the 15th of the month.
We'll get another drought monitor update tomorrow on Thursday.
Right.
But I know North Carolina's made huge rebound from where we started the month, thanks to some of these rainy days we've had. I think South Carolina, you guys, if I recall the last drought monitor, you guys were about even on like how much rain you would gain, but also how much you'd still kind of lost.
Yeah, the problem with us, a lot of the areas that have been in the bad drought have gotten a lot of rain. But two problems. First, that's not everybody. A lot of areas that were really dry haven't really had all that much rain like Columbia has. But the other problem is that when you really dry out the soil, as it has been so dry, and then you put 2 inches of rain down in 3 hours, a lot of it just runs off and it doesn't soak in. So you need either that to happen a lot or gentler rains to happen so that it soaks into the soil rather than just runs off when it's that dry.
South Carolina still got some extreme drought conditions. Again, we'll get an update tomorrow from the drought monitor. It's one of those things that always comes out right after our show. But we'll see. We'll see.
Right.
But what do you got up on your screen, Frank?
That's actually the month to date climatological information for Columbia. And if you look at that, you can see we had a little under an inch of rain from the 1st through the 14th, and then since the 15th, we've had about 8.25 inches of rain. Actually, 9.25. Not because we don't have today's rain on there, and there was a little under 7/10, I think. So we're going to end up coming up just short of 10 inches for the month, with about 9 of it coming since the 15th. Just to give you an idea of how wet it's been the last 2.5 weeks here in Columbia.
That's pretty dang crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we'll send some your way, Scotty.
It puts us up to 11th or 12th place. It depends on how much rain we actually had this morning, but for wettest Julys.
It just kind of goes to show you how weather is so nimble and how it can just flip on a switch.
Mm-hmm.
From a very dry period of June into half the month of July, just almost breaking records.
Yep, and it illustrates how oftentimes when a drought ends, it ends with a flood. And we've had some flooding issues the last couple of weeks around South Carolina.
And we normally say to get out of droughts like this, it normally takes a tropical system. Thankfully, it didn't take a tropical system here. It was multiple rounds of rain and not just one huge storm that dumped all this rain.
Here's my tempest weather data for the month from atop my rooftop. Nearly 9 inches. 8 8/10 of rain this month here in July near Matthews, North Carolina. Let's see, what was our highest temperature? Where's temperature on here? Air temperature up here at the top, a 100.4. I will say, and I think Frank, you and I were talking about this when we were at the Shield Museum for Weatherproof, based on where my Tempest station is, it's on my roof. So it does have a bias, I think, towards hot temperatures because radiation from the roof, it's not that far off.
Yeah, probably.
The roof. And it doesn't do great with wind because it's blocked from essentially the north and the west. But rain, 8 inches, 9 inches of rain, that sounds believable.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just called up the airport real quick in Charlotte. 5.24, not counting anything that's fallen today. And your hottest day, you actually had 101 back on the 5th.
Yeah,
I didn't realize y'all got to 100 or over 100 one day, but I guess y'all did. about that?
Yeah, and that's just air temperature, right? So when we factor in the heat index, I feel like at work today, I remember somebody saying we may have actually briefly gotten to
Yeah, good question. Back in the early
107?
part of the month, the humidity was not all that bad, so your heat index may not have been all that high that particular day. But then again, later in the month, when the humidity started coming up, you were 97 and 98 a couple or 3 days there.
Yeah, we were definitely not.
So
Like
those may have been the
105.
days you had the really high heat index.
Yeah, those are the days my tempest was trying to tell me it was 120 degrees outside on the roof. On the roof, maybe. That's why I'm not on the roof. And if you work a job where you are on a roof, or a construction worker, or just outside in general, my hat's off to you, because that's
Especially
brutal.
if you have to do things like paving, because not only are you out in the sun, you're on top of pavement, which is going to be hot, especially if it's asphalt, which if you're laying asphalt, well, that's 300 and something degrees when you put it down, and that's rough.
That is rough.
Yeah. Plus, you're doing strenuous
Scotty,
work
what are you
out
looking
there.
for?
I was trying to figure out what that piece of paper was blowing over here on my desk, but
Yeah, well, now the rest of us want to know.
it was an old bill. If you need it, you want to pay it for me?
I do not.
It's it's the last time I
we-
traveled to North Carolina. It's the Quick Pass.
Yeah, we're good. We're good for those. That's right.
Yeah, don't look at me, man. I'm closing on a house on Monday. I ain't got no money, and I'm about to have even less.
It's like
I'm excited for your house closure, and
I'm excited too.
I know, right? You're like,
And living
there's
in a house
nothing
instead of an apartment. That's gonna be
right?
awesome.
and
I don't
you don't have to.
I don't have to worry about the upstairs neighbors pounding around up there at 2:30 in the morning.
Don't have to shop around anymore. You don't have to sit on the edge of your seat wondering how much more you got to outbid everybody else.
Yeah.
What the
The
feds
only
can
thing
do
I
with
have to worry
interest
about
rates.
now is moving.
Yeah, that's not fun.
As I always say about moving, you never realize how much stuff you have until you move it all.
We moved into this house right before the pandemic, when you would think we had nothing but time on our hands, and we still have boxes we haven't unpacked.
Yeah.
Scotty, did you want to share with our audience that fun tidbit you shared with us right before the show? And then I'm definitely going to wrap this show up.
Oh, that I discovered I had a broke nose, and and it's affecting my sinuses, and now I may have to have surgery. Yeah, that's
By surgery, you mean that they want to professionally and medically break your nose
re-break
again.
it,
Re-break
and
it.
fix it the right way. I don't know how I feel about that.
I should have asked earlier when we were off air, but when did this happen? How long ago did you break your nose and not realize it? And then just now
So-
figuring out that you broke your nose.
They said it was a childhood traumatic injury, and I was like,
Oh.
And I played baseball, and I played shortstop, and I remember one time the ball like kicked weird, and it hit me square in the nose, and it
That
hurt.
happened to me once. Yeah. Well,
And I
played-
like when you grab your nose, you do like that. And I'm assuming like when I did that, it kind of like maybe set it halfway back in place the way it should. And I just went on with it. And then ever since then, I've had sinus issues, and it's got to the point now that I'm talking on air all the time that my voice goes away sometimes. And so we're like, let's get this checked out. And that's what it stemmed from. So if you ever break your nose, get it set the right way first, so you don't have to go through all this.
Don't forget to tell your bosses if you're going to get your nose reset, and also make sure everyone knows you didn't get a nose job, that you just had a medical
That's
get
right,
reset,
yeah.
because you're just going to have this big bandage on your nose, and people are going to be like, what?
Yeah.
What did you do with your
And I
nose?
wasn't-
Scotty?
Wasn't in a fight or anything. It's
That would be a better story, actually.
I promised snow here in Myrtle Beach, and I didn't get it, and somebody got a little upset about
Like-
it. So
Clocked you.
Yeah. If we're going to have a La Nina again this winter, don't promise snow
yeah, don't promise
this winter. Don't promise it this winter. Watch you end up getting a big storm and ended up having a foot or something. But this is
We
not
are
the year to
due.
promise snow.
We are due every 30 some years.
Mm-hmm. Just like we're due for another major hurricane in South Carolina.
Well, on that note, I'm going to wrap this
About
show up before you
5
guys
years
jinx
since Hugo, and that's
anything
roughly the
else.
return period.
We're
I mean, not to
due
say
for
that too loud.
meteorites and asteroids and locusts and
Frogs.
frogs.
We already had the cicadas.
That's true.
Yeah, the plague of cicadas is already.
We're halfway there.
Now we just need locusts and frogs and Maybe
We had some
finally
geckos.
Tara will let our people go.
We had some geckos get loose in the studio yesterday.
Oh, so you got to play the geckos in Myrtle
Yeah,
Beach.
so that's funny. The sales ladies, they didn't want to touch it, so I just grabbed them by their little tail and put them outside.
Oh, did you see my post on Twitter? I had an unwelcome visitor in the form of a bat a couple nights ago.
I saw that.
In my apartment.
I did see that.
Christian
Another
Morgan
reason I'm ready to get into this house is so hopefully there aren't any bats there.
Meteorologist Christian Morgan at WFNY in Greensboro has you both beat because he tweeted out this email from his work that said, I just want to be aware that a small snake was spotted in the sales area this morning. We lost sight of it. Hopefully the pest control people will find it. So I will take geckos and bats over snakes.
I will,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
And
no,
that's
the
my final
bat.
thought.
Thankfully, the bat was docile. Unfortunately, it was 12:30 in the morning, and when I needed to be in bed, when I spotted the stupid thing, but there it was, hanging from the ceiling, and I'm like, okay, I got to do. I'm not going to let it stay here all night, so I got out a Tupperware container and then slid the lid under it and tried to not hurt the little guy, but I actually did end up pinching his wing a little bit, which he was not a big fan of, but. I don't think I actually hurt him because after I put him outside, he flew away. But
He was like, oh,
Eventually,
this guy's
but-
crazy.
he's done.
All right, everybody. Well, practice heat safety. Keep an eye on
Yes.
the tropics.
Stay
We'll be
well
back
hydrated.
if and when developments warrant.
Lots of
Yeah.
fluids, electrolytes too. Don't forget that. That's important.
And no roofing. Not a good time.
And hopefully you won't be visited by any plagues.
Stay tuned for developments on Scotty's nose saga.
Yes, we'll keep you up to date. We'll let you know how it goes.
But until then, I'm James. That's Frank. And that's Scotty. We'll see you next time in the Carolina Weather Group.
Bye, y'all.